The camera clicked in the dark and the sound ripped right through me like a punch I couldn't catch, so I kicked the door open and stormed in before I even thought. I found Mason kneeling on the floor, tiny foot posed like a model, the camera balanced on his knees while he took picture after picture. He looked up at me with those big wet eyes that used to melt me when he scraped a knee, and he whispered, "Mom, Daddy needs it." His voice broke me in half, and I remember standing there thinking, I am a man and I am supposed to protect him. And I had failed him in that moment without even knowing it. He was 7 now, a kid who used to live in dinosaur shirts and would run until he collapsed, breathing so hard he'd laugh. A week before, a crumpled sleepover invite from Stacy's mom had been shoved into his backpack and he'd said he was too tired to go. That should have been a small thing, just a strange refusal, but it landed wrong in my chest once the camera came out. When I asked where that expensive camera came from, Mason snapped at me in a way I'd never heard from him. "It's for a project. Leave me alone." It wasn't the volume alone, it was the practiced edge in his voice, like he had been coached on how to sound angry so people would back off. After that first scream, everything changed slowly and then all at once. He started wanting pedicures, asking about nail polish in the middle of the grocery store, and his hands would smell like lotion even if I hadn't given him any. He'd stand forever in front of the mirror, tilting his head, touching his face, and saying he needed to look right. I would say, "Mason, buddy, come on dinner," and he'd answer like a little adult, "I'm almost done, I need to check." He guarded that camera like it was the most important thing in his life. Sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking, he'd hide the camera under his bed or slip it into his backpack like it had been planted there by someone who told him it was a secret. Small things started piling up until they couldn't be ignored. Cash appeared in his piggy bank in bills too crisp for a kid who finds quarters under couch cushions. New stuff showed up in his room overnight: a compact mirror, concealer, rows of polish, friendship bracelets that spelled tidy words I didn't buy or teach him. He weighed himself and asked me, "Am I fat?" And I could see the fear behind the question, like a boy trying to map where he fit on some twisted adult chart. The camera memory cards had images that snaked across time, feet posed like product shots, angles I recognized from ads, little toes painted and arranged like someone had rehearsed how to frame them. I remember a night when the weight of it all became physical and I couldn't breathe straight. I sat on the edge of his bed and asked him gently, "Who gave you this? Who told you to take these pictures?" He looked at me like I had asked him to explain the weather, and the words that came out were small and jagged. He said, "We needed to help because you and Mom needed money." That line toppled something in me. I felt every man I was supposed to be collapse into the single raw fact that my son felt he had to help us with secret things he didn't understand. From there, I did what any man who loves his kid would do, and what I should have done the moment I saw the first odd note. I called people who knew how to handle this. We brought the cameras to a detective who listened without blinking and a child advocate who sat down on the floor with toys and asked soft questions while a trained interviewer recorded Mason so he wouldn't have to say the same thing over and over. I watched professionals take the camera and hold it like evidence and not like treasure, and I watched Mason clench my hand so tight his knuckles went white. In those moments, I understood how small he felt and how big the world's betrayal had been. We changed rules fast. Electronics only in the living room, no sleepovers without both parents present, doors cracked when he bathed, and the school tightened pickup procedures after they flagged a name. We started therapy for him and for us, learned phrases like grooming and gifts as manipulation. Sat in rooms where people explained how predators work and how they hide under the shape of a favorite neighbor making pancakes and building forts. Those facts didn't make it easier to sleep, but they made a plan. And as a man who had to lead the household again, I clung to plans like a lifeline while Mason relearned how to be a kid. The next pickup at school changed everything faster than I could breathe, and I remember that bright afternoon like it was a blow. Aaron, the neighbor who always built blanket forts and made the kids pancakes, waved at us from the parking lot like nothing was wrong, smiling his easy smile. Mason grabbed my hand so hard his nails hurt, and he ducked behind me, trembling like he wanted the ground to open and take him. I felt my heart go cold and hot at the same time, and I heard myself say, "It's okay, buddy, let's go," though nothing felt okay anymore. After that day, he refused his old dinosaur tea like it had been contaminated. He said he needed to look grown up, and he started picking clothes that didn't look like they belonged to a 7-year-old. The changes that followed were small and stupid on paper, but when you line them up, they spell something ugly. Unexplained cash showed up in his piggy bank in neat bills he couldn't have earned from a lemonade stand. New items popped up on his dresser that I hadn't bought. Concealer, a handheld magnifying mirror that caught light wrong, dozens of nail polishes in rows, and friendship bracelets with tidy letters spelling pretty and better like someone had given him a script for how to feel. I tried to let some of it slide as a kid experimenting, but the way he guarded that camera and the way he answered my questions felt rehearsed. One afternoon I sat down on his bed and asked to see the photos again, this time with my voice low because I wanted him to tell the truth without being scared. He snatched the camera like it was a live wire, and for the first time in my life I saw fury in him that wasn't mine to tame. He hurled it against the wall with a force that sent plastic and glass scattering across the carpet, and he screamed, "Those are private." As if he were a teenager, not my small son who still forgot to zip his jacket. Sorry for the quick interruption. If you're enjoying this so far, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and leave comment below. It really helps the channel grow. Alright, let's jump back into the story. I remember the sound of that camera breaking and how the tiny click I'd heard months earlier kept replaying in my head like a broken record. After the camera shattered, he sat on the floor and cried, and I sat down beside him and didn't know what to say for a long moment other than, "It's okay, I'm here." He looked at me like he had just been rescued out of something dark, but also like he blamed me for not being there earlier. He whispered, "He said we needed to help because you and Mom needed money," and the sentence fell into the room like a stone. I called Detective Jonah Reed that night and told him everything I'd seen and heard. He drove out within hours, and we stood in the living room while he took notes and asked questions in a voice that made me feel both stupid and supported. A child advocacy specialist named Avery Clark came too. She sat on Mason's floor with toys and asked soft, simple questions so he wouldn't have to repeat the hard things. They told me not to confront Aaron, not to talk to him, and not to let Mason be alone with anyone who gave him weird gifts. Those instructions felt too small and also sacred, like rules that could keep a child inside a life. The detective took the broken camera away and put it in an evidence bag the way professionals do it on TV, and for a minute I felt helpless and grateful at the same time. The tech team later recovered files from the smashed device and found images spanning months, poses and angles that belonged in ads, not in a child's album. Those images were the proof that let the case move forward, and I remember the strange mix of relief and rage when I heard that. Relief because someone else would now see what I had seen, and rage because we had walked past it for too long. We changed the house like a fortress. Phones and gaming devices stayed in the living room, doorways stayed open, and one of us always went to pick him up from school. The school tightened their pickup list after we named Aaron, and the PTA started whispering in ways that felt like protection and judgment at the same time. We enrolled Mason in therapy and began to learn the words that gave shape to what had happened: grooming, manipulation, secrecy. And the more we learned, the more furious I got, because it made clear the work someone had put into making a kid keep quiet. The hardest part was seeing him shrink away from being a kid, and then watching that shrinkage fight back and begin to repair itself in tiny ways. He stopped hiding food like it was currency and started asking to wear his dinosaur shirt again, but the road was jagged. I kept thinking of that day in the parking lot where Aaron smiled and how many small smiles it took to get things hidden. That memory pushed me forward in a way nothing else did. It made me call lawyers, make records, and sit through long interviews where I repeated the awful details until they were recorded and could be used to protect other kids. We called the Child Advocacy Center and Detective Jonah Reed the moment we could breathe long enough to think straight. Because once you see how small your kid looks against something ugly, you don't want to gamble on doing the wrong thing. Jonah came within hours, and he didn't do the loud, showy cop thing. He walked in steady and calm and asked simple questions while taking notes. A specialist, Avery Clark, came with him and sat down on Mason's floor with a couple of dolls and a calm voice that made the room feel less sharp. I watched Mason pick at a seam on one of the dolls, while Avery asked soft questions about movies and pets, and I listened for the tiny crack in his answers that would tell me what I already suspected. The detective photographed the obvious evidence like it was a map to something dangerous: rows of polish lined up on the dresser, a compact mirror sitting at an angle, friendship bracelets with letters that spelled little things meant to comfort. Jonah took pictures of the items, labeling each shot like he was building a story that could stand up in a courtroom. He wore gloves when he touched anything so he wouldn't contaminate prints, and his voice never rose. I felt a mix of relief and guilt watching a stranger treat my boy's room like a crime scene. Relief because someone competent had arrived, and guilt because I wondered how long I had missed the signs. Avery let Mason play but kept the questions tight and friendly, the kind that don't push a kid into details he doesn't want to give twice. She asked about favorite colors and animals and then slid into the question that mattered as naturally as a parent would. Did someone ever ask you to keep a secret? He answered with a whisper that felt like someone else's. He said it was a secret because it would help my mom and dad. Hearing those words from my son felt like being punched in the throat. The sentence landed and kept sinking heavier. Avery nodded slowly and said, "Thank you for telling me, you're very brave." That small praise seemed to shock him with relief and also fear, like he was only just realizing what he'd done. We called the hotline you call in a panic at midnight, the one that says they'll listen and guide you. They told us the same thing Jonah said in person: don't contact Aaron, don't try to handle this on your own. They explained that confronting him could scare Mason into silence or ruin evidence. That advice felt like a compass, cold, precise, and necessary. It also felt like a rule that punished me for being human, because my first urge wanted to punch and scream and make things right fast. Instead, I followed the directions and learned that patience can be a weapon when it protects a child's chance at justice. Jonah bagged the broken camera pieces like they were fossils, and he labeled everything with timestamps and notes so every little thing had a place in the story he was building. I helped where they asked, holding the bag steady while they sealed it, and felt stupidly grateful for the gloves that kept me from touching anything and ruining their work. For the first time since I'd seen the camera click in the dark, I had the strange comfort of process, steps that could lead to charges and to proof. But process wasn't the same as closure. We waited and tried to be quiet in our house that suddenly felt too big for the four of us. That first night after their visit, Mason squeezed between my wife and me like he wanted to become sand and fill the gap and be safe. He kept waking and whispering, "Don't let him come." And each time I blinked awake, I promised silently and fiercely that I wouldn't let that happen again. We slept like bodies with alarms built into them, one ear tuned to the hallway, one hand ready to pull blankets up like shields. I held him tight and felt the tremors run through his small frame, and I would whisper, "No one's coming, buddy, we're right here." He clung to that line like a rope, and I clung to it too, because in those early days, promises are all a man can offer besides action. In the mornings, we started telling him small truths that felt big. That telling someone grown up was brave, that secrets that make kids uncomfortable are not his problem, and that the police and the center were there because we needed people who knew how to fix the scary parts. We kept things predictable: breakfast at the same time, shoes by the door, TV only after homework, because normal felt like armor. I learned to ask the right questions without sounding like an interrogator, and when Mason answered in fits and starts, we let the pauses be. Those pauses held the rest of the story, and every quiet sentence he offered was a stone at the base of a bridge leading away from what happened toward something safer. We made rules so tight they felt like armor, and I told the kids in plain words why. Phones and tablets stayed in the living room at all times, no exceptions, so nothing private could happen in a bedroom. Bathroom doors were left cracked when anyone younger than 12 used them, and one of us always had to be the parent available at pickup no matter how busy work got. I said the rules out loud so Mason could hear them and so they would feel real, and he nodded like a soldier learning orders. He kept close to me, hand in mine at school drop-off, and I felt both proud and furious every time another parent looked our way like they were seeing a problem they hadn't known was real. We got Mason into therapy fast, and the first sessions were all about being safe and being heard. The therapist taught him ways to say no and to name the feelings that made him freeze up, and he learned small rituals that helped him breathe when memories rushed in. I sat through some sessions too, because a man in this position had to learn language that didn't scare him and ways to ask questions that let him answer. The work was slow and it was ugly, but the small steps, choosing a dinosaur shirt again, letting his laugh spill out at dinner, were the kind of progress you hang onto when everything else feels uncertain. We took him to see a pediatrician who had a way of making small rooms feel safe for kids who'd seen too much, and the doctor did the gentle, necessary checks while a nurse talked to Mason about his favorite cartoons to keep him calm. The nurse explained every step before it happened. "I'm going to check your knee, buddy, okay?" And that small kindness made a huge difference. The pediatrician wrote notes, ordered follow-ups, and connected us to specialists. He didn't act shocked. He acted like someone who had helped other kids and knew what to do next, which steadied me enough to keep going for Mason's sake. Meanwhile, Detective Jonah Reed kept us in the loop without giving us false hope. He said the tech teams were pulling everything they could from both the broken camera we'd found and the devices seized from Aaron's home. I remember the long meeting where he opened a laptop and showed us thumbnails like a stone dropping into a pond, little images that rippled into proof. The techs managed to recover deleted photos that dated back months, and the pattern was clear. Posed shots, careful framing, pictures taken with a purpose that didn't belong to a child's random album. Seeing those images, sterile and exact on a screen, made my stomach clench and sharpened my anger into focus. Detective Reed explained what that evidence meant in plain words so I could understand it without getting lost in legal language. He said the recovered images were enough to support a charge, and that they would use that proof to get a search warrant for Aaron's house and electronics. "We need to show probable cause," he told me, and then he walked through the steps like a man guiding someone across a stream so they don't slip. I watched him label things in his notes, the same steady, calm voice that had kept me from making mistakes, and I trusted him because he seemed to know the parts of the system we didn't. The search warrant came a few days later, and I remember the house feeling both watched and hollow when officers went through it. They took computers, phones, hard drives, and boxes marked with dates. I stood in my driveway while they did their work and my hands went cold because this was the point where the slow machine of justice started eating into the life of the man who'd hidden behind pancake sundaes and late-night forts. It felt like a mix of relief and a vengeful hope that evidence would speak louder than the polite small talk Aaron had used to hide behind. Afterward, the prosecutor began talking about filings and timelines and the long road ahead. There were hearings and motions and a kind of bureaucratic grind that made the process feel endless. But the recovered photos and the items collected from Aaron's home gave the case teeth. They gave the prosecutor the tools he needed to file charges that would stick long enough to keep Aaron from walking back into neighborhood life while we tried to build ours back. Every legal step forward felt heavy and necessary, like paving a road away from what had happened so Mason and other kids who might have been hurt had a chance at safety and some measure of justice. When the officers went into Aaron's house, I felt like the world narrowed to a single hard point, and I braced for fallout the way you hold your breath before a storm. I drove slowly around the block, parked a distance away, and watched uniformed people move in and out with boxes and bags. Minutes after they started, my phone rang and it was Stacy's mom on the line, her voice raw and sobbing like someone who'd been blindsided. She said, "I had no idea. He was the one who always let our kids stay late." Hearing her broke something open in both of us because the neighbor who made pancakes had been turning into a stranger at the same time he was supposed to be part of our community. They brought Aaron in that day, and I remember him walking toward the squad car like a man whose life had split in two, his easy smile gone, his hands cuffed. He looked at me for a second and I felt everything in my chest pull tight, and then they closed the door of the car and drove off. News travels fast in small towns. Within hours, other parents started calling. And within days, more families came forward with strange, small things that didn't make sense until you put them next to each other. A little girl's parents said she'd started wetting the bed and crying whenever they tried to take family photos. Another family mentioned jewelry and gifts that had arrived with no sender. Those signs piled up into a pattern no one wanted to see. Detective Jonah Reed and his team widened the investigation. I sat in a room where they laid out timelines and phone logs and messages, and every new sheet of paper felt like another nail in a door that had to be closed. As more accounts came in, it turned out the behavior wasn't limited to our block or even to our town. The tech analysts pulled threads through devices and found evidence that some of the images had been distributed online. That discovery changed everything. When you find distribution on the internet, the case steps into a different arena, a place where local cops need federal resources, where the scope becomes national. The FBI got involved after we saw the tech reports. An agent told me bluntly, "This shifts to federal because of interstate and online distribution." I remember the way he said it, flat, professional, and like a man who has seen the ripple effects before. Once the FBI took interest, the potential penalties and the seriousness of the case climbed fast. Aaron went from being a local arrest to a suspect in a federal investigation, and that escalation made him a different kind of flight risk. Bail that might have been possible under state charges got pulled, and the judge revoked it when federal prosecutors argued the danger and the risk of evidence tampering. In the weeks after the search, the neighborhood felt hollowed out. People stopped letting kids play in yards unsupervised, and parents who used to gossip about paint colors now shared passwords and pickup plans. I got emails from families several towns over, and one father left a voicemail I played 3 times because his voice cracked the same way mine had the first week. "We thought it was just us," he said. "Thank you for coming forward." Those words felt strange, like we had done the right thing and also like we had opened a wound that would take a long time to heal. Court filings started appearing and the paperwork was a world away from the tiny voice that said, "He said we needed to help because you and mom needed money." The charges piled up on paper: receipt of child pornography, distribution, coercion. The words are clinical, and yet they carried the weight of nights when my son couldn't sleep and mornings when he refused to wear his dinosaur shirt. Watching the legal process unfold in documents and hearing the prosecutor, talk about timelines and charges made it feel real in a way nothing else had. The case that had lived in our homes suddenly filled courtrooms and federal databases. There were moments of ugly negotiation too, offers from Aaron's family pleading for leniency, messages that tried to spin things into misunderstandings. I got calls from people trying to calm the panic or protect reputations, and once I even received a voicemail that said, "We'll make it go away." I handed those messages to Detective Reed and watched him file them. He said, "Anything that looks like intimidation goes in the file." I learned quickly that this was a legal fight as much as it was about keeping my son safe, and that meant every hard feeling had to be documented. When Aaron's bail was revoked, I felt a thin relief that he couldn't slip away while the investigation went deeper. But relief was small and brittle, because nothing about what had happened felt less sharp in the house at night. The FBI and the tech teams kept digging, following leads across state lines, and every step forward felt like layering concrete over a fresh grave. Necessary, heavy, irreversible. We watched the machine work and held our boy close, because whatever the investigators found would never be enough to erase what had been done, but it could stop it from reaching more children. Therapy became our new normal, and I learned to measure days by sessions and small wins instead of the clock on the wall. We started play therapy because the people who knew this work told us kids show what they can't say, and in those rooms Mason built walls of blocks and hid dolls behind them like he was trying to make a secret fortress. He would push the blocks down and then rebuild them again and again, and each collapse seemed to let out a little air from inside him. I sat in the chair while the therapist watched and explained things in plain language so a man like me could understand. How acting things out is part of processing, how control can be taken back through play. There were moments that left me shaking, like the day he cut up dress-up clothes and said he didn't want to be pretty anymore. He sliced the fabric with a concentration I'd never seen and then looked at me like he'd given away the last of something sacred. The therapist told me that destroying those costumes was a way for him to reject what had been used against him, that this was a healthy reclaiming of control. I tried to nod like I understood on command, but mostly I just sat there feeling the weight of it and feeling proud at the same time because the boy had found a way to say no without words. We changed bedtime into something safer and smaller. For months, Mason slept in a closet that we turned into a cozy little room with lights, blankets, and a stack of dinosaur books. It sounds weird to anyone who hasn't done it, but a lit closet felt like a fortress to him, smaller, predictable, easier to make safe. He liked the walls close and the lights soft, and I would lie awake while he slept and count my promises to him into the dark. Those nights were not neat. He would wake and whisper, "Don't let him come," and I would touch his shoulder to tell him we were there, working and not going anywhere. When he asked for a dog, we went to the shelter and found Guard, a mellow golden retriever who looked like he had been waiting for a job. Guard dog slept outside Mason's closet door for the first weeks, then eventually on a little bed inside, and he became a steady breathing presence that seemed to tell Mason the world was not all danger. Mason named him Guard because that's what he needed, a living, warm thing that would stay. The dog would press his head against Mason's knee in the middle of rough nights, and the boy began to giggle at Guard's small snoring the way kids do when something soft eases the edge off a bad memory. We learned about grooming in meetings and pamphlets and in late-night conversations that left my tongue raw from asking the same questions over and over. The bracelets, the money, the beauty items, each one had a role in Aaron's pattern. They were not gifts as much as tools to make Mason feel special and to normalize secrecy. Someone buys a kid something pretty, and a kid learns that secret gifts are how you keep specialness. Someone pays a child small sums, and the child begins to believe they have responsibility that belongs to adults. The therapist explained how predators pick small gestures that look kind and then twist them into ownership. Learning those truths made me furious in ways that did not help anyone. So I turned that rage into action, therapy appointments, reading, calling other parents, going to support groups where people sat with their own ugly stories and passed along advice that kept you from stumbling. We filled our home with rules that sounded strict because they had to be. No electronics in bedrooms, no unmonitored sleepovers, always 2 adults at pickups if possible. The rules were scaffolding for a child learning to trust his body again, and for a family trying to breathe without constant fear. Mason's progress was messy and quick and slow all at once. Some days he'd bolt from school to the car and hug me without remembering to be ashamed of anything, and other days he'd refuse to let anyone near his feet for fear it would start something in him. We let both things be true. The therapist taught us ways to celebrate small things, ordering dinosaur pancakes on a Saturday, letting him pick his outfit even if it clashed, applauding a bedtime without nightmares. Those claps were small medicines. Through all of this, I learned that healing is not a straight line you draw and then step across. It is a lot of tiny choices made over months. Choosing the closet because it felt safer, bringing home Guard because a dog can hold space you can't, letting a child cut costumes because it was how he took power back. I am a man who tells stories now because the telling keeps me honest. And this one is about how we rebuilt a little boy's life from the inside out, using light, boundaries, and the solid, steady weight of a dog named Guard. The legal part moved in fits and starts and felt like walking through mud you couldn't see the bottom of, so I learned patience the hard way. The prosecutor, Ethan Brooks, sat across from us in a conference room one afternoon and said, "Trials can re-traumatize kids, plea deals are common." Hearing that line from a man who had seen this before didn't make it easier. It made me steel myself for a long, ugly road. I remember thinking, I'm a man who wants to fight everything in sight, but I also had to put Mason first and listen to people who knew the system. Aaron's lawyers started with offers that smelled like hush money, and they tried to bargain with the kinds of numbers meant to make people go away. Calls came from family members and from a lawyer who said, "We can resolve this quietly." I told them no, we won't sell our boy's truth for cash. Saying no felt like lifting something heavy off both of us, and I remember thinking that refusing them is part of the kind of protection a man in this house has to offer. The messages kept coming, polite at first and then less so, but we handed every inch of it to Detective Jonah Reed and to prosecutor Ethan Brooks so nothing could get lost or twisted. Months passed with hearings, motions, and meetings that blurred into one another, and the calendar in our kitchen became a record of small legal steps instead of soccer games. Detective Reed focused on keeping the chain of custody airtight so nothing could be thrown out later for technical reasons. He explained in a way I could follow how every sticker, tag, and forensics note mattered. If we lose chain of custody, he told me, you could force a replay of the whole nightmare. Those words pushed me into document mode. I kept copies, noted dates, and learned how to hand over feelings so officials could turn them into proof. The tech teams worked in a dark room full of screens and patience, rebuilding timelines from recovered images and metadata like archaeologists piecing together a life. They matched dates, cameras, and file edits and created a pattern that showed this wasn't a one-time thing. The evidence started looking less like scattered clues and more like a mesh that trapped the truth. Seeing that chronology helped me sleep better some nights, because it meant someone could tell the story in court without forcing Mason to repeat everything. When the defense's options narrowed, they eventually offered a federal plea that covered the most serious counts: producing and distributing exploitative material. In a courthouse that smelled like old paper and coffee, we watched on a closed-circuit feed while Aaron admitted what he'd done. I remember the room where we sat, small, fluorescent lights humming, while Mason and my wife were in a protected room elsewhere with support people and a therapist holding their hands. I could hear the attorney read the plea and then Aaron's voice, flat and small on the screen, saying what he had to say. "I plead guilty," he said. Those words were both an ending and a terrible beginning. The judge handed down a long federal sentence and required lifetime registration as a sex offender, and when the gavel fell, I felt something like relief and something like ash at the same time. The judge made it clear the sentence reflected the federal scope of the crimes and the harm caused. Ethan Brooks told us afterward, "This is accountability. It's not a fix, but it's a boundary." I held that line in my mind because it mattered. The sentence kept one man away and gave a measure of protection to other kids who might have been in danger. Saying justice was done felt too neat. The plea avoided a painful trial that could have put Mason through public testimony, and in that way it was mercy. But the sentence didn't erase nights of fear or the slow work of therapy. It did add a layer of safety, and it allowed us to turn more attention to healing instead of court dates. I learned that justice in the system can look like a deal, hard, messy, imperfect, but it can still remove a predator from the neighborhood and make room for rebuilding. Afterward, we kept doing the work people had told us matters: therapy sessions, family check-ins, and new routines that protect and let Mason grow. I told him in words I hope he remembers, "You told the truth and we kept you safe." He nodded and then ran off to play with Guard, the dog who likes to nap in the sun. I am a man who tells this because the truth needs to be out. The system moved slowly, but when evidence, advocacy, and a refusal to settle quietly met, we found a way to keep a child safer and to make someone answer for what he did. Slowly, life stopped feeling like damage control and started feeling like something we could live in again. And that change came in small, stubborn pieces that I watched like a man waking from a bad dream. Mason went back to wearing his dinosaur shirts the way he used to, big T-Rex faces and holes from rough play. And the sight of that shirt on him felt like a little victory each morning. He began choosing his own clothes again, picking mismatched socks because he liked them, and one Saturday he asked if we could make pancakes shaped like animals instead of initials. I drove to the store for extra batter just to see him grin while he stamped a pancake into an elephant with a spatula. The first big laugh after everything was a thing I will keep with me forever. His dinosaur birthday party, kids running in the yard, someone shrieking when another kid fell into a pile of leaves, and Mason the runner, Mason the roarer, planting his feet and doing the loudest, silliest T-Rex roar he could manage. It was not staged or careful. It was a real big laugh that shook his shoulders and spilled out. I remember feeling my chest unclench in a way I hadn't known was possible. That party was messy and loud and imperfect, and it felt like the best kind of normal. He chose to hang his body safety poster in the hallway one afternoon like it was a proclamation. He wrote rules on it in his own blocky handwriting. Tell a grown-up if someone asks you to keep a secret and you don't have to help with money. He also started writing letters to his younger self, little notes folded and tucked under his pillow with lines like, "You were brave. I am proud of you." I found a few when I reached in to smooth his sheets and read them with my eyes blurring, and I folded them back gently so he would find them the next night and know they were still there. Mom and I signed him up for the school talent show on a dare night, and he practiced detective-themed skits where he wore a fake badge and asked silly questions about missing cookies. He told me with a proud frown that he wanted to be a detective one day to help kids like him. When he said it, I felt like the world had handed me a small, stubborn promise that grew roots. I told him, "Then you'll be the best detective I know," and he beamed the kind of smile that lets light out in the house again. The practical things mattered too. The FBI's victim services stepped in and covered long-term therapy and medical costs, which lifted a weight that had been gnawing at us. A caseworker walked us through benefits and appointments in plain language and made sure Mason's therapy continued without gaps. That support let us focus more on healing than on the logistics, and for a father who had been scrambling, it felt like a hand on the back saying, "Keep walking, you're not alone." We joined a parents' support group made up of people who knew the same nightmare in different accents and houses, and those meetings became a lifeline for me. Men and women shared practical tips about dealing with schools, about how to answer the hard questions without making a child feel blamed, and about the traps to avoid when the legal system starts to feel like an oven. Hearing other parents say, "We did the best we could," and mean it without shame, helped me stop feeling like every failure would be the last word in our story. Every day brought progress and setbacks like a seesaw you never really get used to, but the trend tipped towards better more often than not. Some nights he would wake up and whisper the old fear, and I would sit with him until his breathing evened out again. Other days he would run to the porch and tell me about a new detective book he wanted, all in one breath. We learned to celebrate the small wins, a dinner where he ate without hoarding food, a morning he picked his dinosaur shirt without looking at his feet, and not punish the bad days with guilt. I am a man who tells stories because saying the truth out loud keeps the dark from getting polite. We rebuilt routines that felt like safety, predictable breakfasts, a single path for phones to live in the living room, regular check-ins where Mason could say anything without fear. We filled the house with small rituals, Saturday pancake animals, library trips to choose mystery books, guard the dog's slow patrols across the yard, that knitted light back into the corners where it had been thin. Mason grew braver bit by bit, and watching him taught me how to be brave in new ways. I learned to ask for help, to file things away carefully, to refuse quick fixes that left others exposed. We are not finished. Healing doesn't unzip neatly. But the loud roars in the yard at his birthday, the letters tucked under a pillow, and the steady weight of a dog named Guard sleeping at the closet door tell me we are moving forward. I tell this as a man who was ready to break and who chose instead to build, one small, stubborn day at a time. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. And drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.